without further ado, we have Mr. Brian Douglas coming to the stage. Give it up for him, y'all.
All right, I've got no headphones, so if y'all could say, whoop, there it is. Nah, I'm good. Okay. I just wanted them to say, whoop, there it is. I just figured, show my age. Cool. Y'all, my name is Brian Douglas, but I actually go by B Dougie. I'm B Dougie on the internet. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I'm going to talk about getting involved in open source. So I should have slides up here. Oh, okay, cool. All right, so knowing where to get started with open source, I work on a little side project called Open Sauce. It's a pathway to find your next open source contribution. I'd appreciate if you check it out. There's a website, opensauce.pizza. But I want to actually start, because we're in Atlanta, talk about HBCUs. Can I get a woo woo if you went to an HBCU? All right, yell out your HBCU. Where'd you go? All I heard was Savannah State. Good on you. All right, so most of y'all know HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. I didn't go to HBCU, unfortunately. I wish I did. But money was a thing, and staying close to home in Florida was also a thing for me. So happy to get my degree. But if y'all didn't know, the originator of HBCUs, Booker T. Washington, started Hampton University in Virginia. And he started this industry of HBCUs because American history is not a thing everywhere in every public school system. But when black Americans were freed, there was places for them to learn trade, and trade like hospitality. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for folks to learn the basics and basic skills. I'm a boot camp grad, actually, and I think boot camps are a really good place to get your foot into tech. So if you don't know any boot camps, definitely ask around, because there's a lot of boot camp grads around here. But I mentioned that because I want to talk about open source. Open source is actually, it's a legit way to get yourself in the industry. And a lot of people don't leverage this a lot, and they think about it as like a free help for projects. And I don't think it needs to be like that. There's actually a lot of money in open source, and I'm happy to talk more about that, but I'm not talking about that today. But this is a bunch of data about how valuable it is to be in open source, and how valuable it is for recruiting for tech jobs. My day job today is at GitHub. I lead developer relations there. I have a team of advocates. Actually, a lot of my team's actually right over here. Yeah, shout out team. Yeah, we got an awesome team, so you come talk to us. And so my job is actually to get people to use features at GitHub, like use things like GitHub Actions and code spaces. So talk to me about that. But I'm going to spend way more time talking about Open Sauce. Open Sauce is the project that I built 6 years ago. Really seriously, I've been working on it for the past 2 years. And I'm really just trying to make open source approachable for more people. This is actually what I look like on the internet. It's funny because I've been talking to people, and it'd be like, oh, let's follow me on Twitter, and they already follow me. So I just wanted to shout out, that's what I look like on the internet. It's very confusing. It was like 20 pounds ago, so a lot of people don't think it's a real picture, but it is. That was me. And then Brian Douglas, my given name. I do have a story of how I got into doing tech. I actually graduated with a finance degree in 2008. Went into tech sales because 2008 was not a great time for a finance job. And then I eventually found my way through a lot of happenstance and serendipity to eventually get a job in San Francisco doing code full time. So I do recommend, there's a URL up there, just check out the story. I can't go into that. Also, everything about me is on Twitter, so follow me there. But I want to talk about this story here, my first open source contribution. And it was back in 2015. I wanted to build a project using Node.js, and at the time I didn't know how to use Node.js. It was server-side JavaScript. And what I did is I found the project on GitHub. And because I didn't know how to use GitHub back then, I actually emailed the maintainer of the project. I just straight up just found his email on the profile, emailed him, said, hey, I can't use this thing. How do I use it? To my surprise, he emailed me back. And he mentored me how to use Node.js and how to build on top of like some next level features. And what I was really impressed about that is this guy was actually a digital nomad. And he spent his entire time traveling through Thailand following this K-pop band or whatever. At the time, I had no idea what K-pop was, but I learned what it was at that point. And I was just super impressed on his ability just to like unblock me. And I've been trying to unblock people in tech as well as through open source since then. So, yeah, Gucci was supposed to be headlining on Saturday, but anybody a fan of Gucci Mane? So there was this quote back in 2009, I think it was, if you don't got sauce, then you lost. It was a long, rambly conversation, but like the idea was like, how do you understand if you really got the sauce? And his response is, if you don't got sauce, then you lost. And I think with open source, it's very similar. Because if you know what you're doing, you're accelerating in your career. I was telling people on the shuttle ride over, like if you can get close to core maintainers of a project, any project, like that's a really good in into any company, because these are the folks talking to every single company because they're all consulting and chatting. And if you just become friends with them, and there's a lot of folks here who do open source, including Ken big into open source, you saw him 2 talks ago, like it's an opportunity there. And I'll say it now because it's the end of my slides, but it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. And if you can get like folks to know who you are and like give you a chance, that's exactly how I got to where I am today, including like Scott Hanselman. He was a mentor of mine as well and like got me into different rooms. Actually, I was able to speak on the keynote stage of Microsoft Build last year, which is honor and privilege. So the question is like, how do you get into open source? Like, what are the first steps? And I think a lot of folks, I think there's a lot of like misdirection, because a lot of people say, oh, look at your package.json or look at the project you're using, and then just go contribute. And there's like this there's like that meme of you draw an owl, you have like the 2 circles, and then step 2 is like finish the owl. Like that's kind of what it feels like with open source. And my whole thing is like, you can find good first issues on GitHub. So if you get any project on GitHub, github.com/that-project, username, repo, and /contribute, it'll give you contribution, issues, and stuff you can do today. But there needs to be a step before that. And there's also this event that happens every year. It's going to happen again in October. It's called Hacktoberfest. There's a lot of hype, and there's a lot of like inroads into making contributions to open source. But what I want to do is I want to make it past October. I want to actually make this a thing like every week, every weekend. So what I'm pointing out is like there's more than just good first issues. Like there's a lot of like good first interactions. There's a lot of community that you can just chat in. I think Discord's a great place if you're not involved in Discords at all. Almost every big open source project has a Discord. And I want to talk a little about the system. So there's a system, and I think when you understand that tech is unequitable, and this is not equality currently today in tech, we'd love to have it, but once you know how to play the game, it's going to be a lot easier to sort of excel. So I'm happy to share all the secret sauce. But for now, I just want to talk about Michael Jordan. So I got these, got the ones on today. Actually, I think everybody's got ones on. It's like, they're like Kleenexes at this point. Everybody's got a pair. But what I'm getting at is I watched this documentary back in 2020. Anybody watch The Last Dance? Yeah, so I watched it, and like the one thing that you learn through this experience of Michael Jordan in his last year as a Bull, because he did retire for the 2nd time, but then he retired again as a Wizard. As a lost cause. But anyway, so he retired, and they talk about his whole last year and what made him so great. Like, what was the secret sauce for MJ to be who he was? And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, he used to practice and shoot free throws before anybody else came in. And like that's one part of it. But what it really is, it was that during an era where most people thought of like Shut Up and Jam, Charles Barkley. It was like on the game of basketball, you have the idea is to get the ball in the hoop, right? I don't have to explain basketball to anybody. I'm happy to have a whole deep dive about basketball, trust me. Also, shout out to the Warriors, Warriors in 5. All right, so, but once you realize what the system is in the game of basketball, they applied statistics to the NBA back in 10 years ago. There's a book called Sprawl Ball, very similar to Moneyball. And what they found is that at one point of the court, 31% of the shots go in. And the reason for that is like most players are right-handed. It's like the arc, it's how close you are to the rim. Like once you know where most shots go in, your entire system plays to that one point. So like if you have 5 people on the court, you know in the system that as long as you can make it to that point, you'll get a goal. And I think in engineering it's the same thing. It's all about a system. Like where do you fit in the mix? So if you're great at automation, if you're great at testing, if you're great at just writing JavaScript, like you fit in the system. And I interview people a lot. I've interviewed for engineers as well as my team for advocates. And like we want to find out where you fit in the system and how you play to your strengths and our sort of operation. So the secret sauce for Michael Jordan was actually the triangle offense. And if you don't know about the triangle offense, I can't go into details about it, but it's basically you make a triangle so that someone's on the left, someone's on the right. So if you're double team, somebody's open. And you don't even have to think about it, it's open. It's just like automation and testing. Like if you know if you're gonna ship to GitHub, something's gonna happen, either staging, deployment, you fit in the system. And I think in open source, there's a lot of opportunities to find your place in the system through all those things I mentioned, and just slide into a team. And you get free mentorship, you get work on actual projects that are used by Fortune 500 companies across the world. Like it's such a great opportunity. I wish more people would take that advantage. So every role in open source provides value. And there's so much value, it doesn't have to be code. Like you can just write great documentation. Like you can go speak at a conference like this as a non-coder, but still represent an open source project. And I would say every company has an open source project that's probably relevant that you could probably get into the system from. There's like a whole back door of how people are getting jobs without whiteboarding through open source. One of them is the triage team. So at GitHub, we have a triage role, and it's a specific team just to label issues and to triage issues. And I was talking to, 2 summers ago, I was talking to Next.js, Tim at Next.js, and he was actually shout out to Vercel. They got I think they have a table. I remember they're just walking around. They got shirts on. But I was talking to Tim, and he was saying he was triaging 100 issues a day. And I was like, how do you do that? He's like, I just like doing it. And he's like, well, what happens if it's 200? He's like, I guess I'll do 200. And what they did at Next.js is that they actually got more up-and-coming folks to help triage issues. And then they started leveraging GitHub discussions to start triaging conversations about what was happening in the next it's what they call it, but the next version of Next. And like, it's an opportunity for people to say, hey, you know what? I can't write this code, but you know what? I can actually label an issue like a boss. So, opportunity. I actually stole this idea from the Express team, Express.js, but I've seen so many other open source projects start with the triage team. My project has a triage team. And the goal is really, if you use open source, there's probably a bug in there. If you can triage that bug, just open the issue, document how it works, or how it broke, rather, like it's opportunity right there for someone else to pick up the pieces. And like, I'm a big fan of good first issues, but good first issues should have an answer in it. So all my good first issues have like lines of codes of what you can fix and what you can change, and then you're right in the system, like right away. Like there's no barrier of entry. Sometimes there is, like I'm not perfect, our maintainers aren't perfect, but there's so much opportunity out there in a project that you can just sort of jump into. And it's like, a lot of people have downtime, you got some free time, maybe you take like a week off of work. Like there's a lot of opportunity just to go find yourself into a system with open source project. Cool, and then I wanted to shout out, like Discord is a place to find your inroads. So if you go to discord.com/open source, there's a ton of open source projects that have a Discord. I think the sort of secret sauce for open source is actually people. It's not about how good you are at coding, but if you can talk to somebody, do a little chat message and say, hey, I'm interested in learning, like people will give you the time. I've actually talked to the folks at TC39 and like on the Node.js core team, and their biggest barrier to entry is actually most people are kind of flaky. Like you'll do a good first issue and you disappear. Or we mentor you into doing a project or joining a team and then you disappear. And I think the biggest like barrier to entry is actually they just need people to show up and like stay close. Like I played high school football years ago. I was not a star, so like don't shout me out. But the thing, I played wide receiver, and like the thing to do with the wide receiver, you stay next to coach at all times because you never know when he's gonna pull you in. And as long as you're standing near like someone who's gonna pull you in, like it's opportunity. So this is a thing we do in our, I feel like I have to Doug you to this. I don't know if you guys can hear that music though. But linked issues. So there's an on-ramp into contributing to open source, to my project. And we do this intentionally because we want to train you on how to contribute to any project. So we just have like guardrails on how do you contribute to open source. And whenever you contribute to open source, we actually ask you to put a linked issue. And what this means is like you have to have an issue before you open up a PR. And the reason for that is like we could take your contribution, but chances are we won't take it because like we're gonna have to read, have to understand like why you made this change, like where this came from, who are you? I've got so many good contributions to my projects, but I have no idea who you are because you have a faceless avatar, you have no LinkedIn, you have nothing I can figure out if you're a real person, because if I take on that code, I have to maintain that code forever. So if I can't pull you in and say, hey, I got a question about what you wrote, then I'm not gonna take your code. So it's all about trust. I gotta trust you first. And by trusting me, by opening up issue first, that's what we do. So we actually have a GitHub action called the PR compliance action. And what we do is we check to see if there's a linked issue on these points inside the GitHub repo, or sorry, the GitHub pull request. And there's no issue, we have an error message that pops up and says, hey, there's no issue. We'll take the contribution if it's really, really good and we think we can contribute back to it. But if there's no issue, like I just need some documentation. Because like, shout out if you're really good at writing docs. Anybody? All right, one person in the back, all right, cool, another person, all right, you're hired. Yeah, because no one wants to write docs. You write code like a boss, but then when I go into your PR, there's like a blank, no description provided. And I can't take that, and most open source maintainers can't take that. And honestly, if I was your engineering manager, I wouldn't take that either. Yeah, like you're out in 2 weeks. I don't mean to be so harsh, but I just really need you to write documentation. So like this is the GitHub action. If you're not familiar with GitHub Actions, it's a tool, it's a feature on GitHub. And we built this GitHub action through conversation through Discord at first, that eventually turned into a reproducible tool that you can use on any project. Cool, so open source, it's a system, it's a game. Like once you figure out how to play the game, like you're pretty good. So like in most projects, you can find out good like contributors, who's like making contributions. A lot of this is like charts and graphs that don't really make a lot of sense. You can actually deep dive into like who's made contributions in like the latest, week. That's a thing. But it's kind of hard to grok to understand like who is a maintainer, who's a contributor, because I'm all about people. So if I can talk to the person who's making the most changes and have them mentor me for free, that's what I'm gonna do first. So what I'm doing with open source, we're actually building a little tool to identify high impact individuals right off the bat. So what we have here is we have like a chart that we have created, like a calendar. And in this project, you can see there's like one person that stands out. And this is, by the way, this is a Next.js project I mentioned earlier. That's a high impact individual. They actually made some changes to the Webpack build. So they have a lot of good insight on like performance. So if I want performance improvements in my next app, I'm gonna reach out to this person. And I think when you do things like this, you sort of stand out from the crowd. You don't get there from just doing a blind PR with no issue. You do it through talking and having conversation through the project maintainers in the community. The other thing, I won't go into details about this because I know we're a bit over, but we're giving deep dives into like different file level changes and stuff like that. So if you have a monorepo, you don't know who owns what, we're gonna be able to identify that pretty easily. That's just another slide. And then like, just kind of understanding like what contributions have you made in the last 30 days, 120 days. Like that's all stuff we're gonna hopefully share as a platform. We're currently not publicly, this is actually not ready yet. These are all screenshots of stuff I can see. But just want to shout out like things like understanding what types of changes are needed. Like most people think like everything's all new code, new features, but this is VS Code, and VS Code's all their changes are maintenance. So updating dependencies, updating files to like match with new things, like updating file name changes. Like that's the majority of the code that's being shipped on VS Code. So if you think in that mindset, like, oh, I can maintain this project. I'm not shipping brand new features. I'm actually just making sure this thing stays alive. Cool, and then like I've got some other charts, but there's not really important to go into detail on. But what I wanted to say is like, when it comes to open source, it's more about it's more than the green squares. I think a lot of folks can get like in the mindset of like, I gotta get a green square for today or for tomorrow. But actually, you just remove that from your profile. It's actually, you could do that if you wanted to. Like the focus should be like interaction. Like if there's somebody who's mentoring me and showing me the ropes, because if you're trying to get your next job, your senior job, your promotion, your raise, like there's so much free help out there, and it could happen through open source. Cool, I also, I put this together called Awesome Black Developers. I did this because I always get asked every year during Black History Month, February, hey, what Black open source maintainers are there? And usually I don't know. Like I know people doing open source, I don't know if they're still doing open source. So I created a repo, an awesome list, just to make it easier for folks to find maintainers and folks that you can get mentorship from. If you maintain a project or anything like that, reach out to me. I'd love to put you on the list, promote you, get you some sponsorship and etc. So that's what I did. And I really would love to talk more about open source. I've been actually throwing open source stickers out. I threw some Black the Cat stickers out inside, so if you saw the black Octocat, that was me. Love to talk more about the Black the Cats if you'd like. And then I also have a YouTube channel where I started interviewing open source maintainers about the secret sauce. So this is Faraz. He built like the NPM fund, and he was the catalyst actually for GitHub sponsors to be a thing, because he built a whole tool that no one liked. So then GitHub built a tool that everybody does like. And I would love for you to hear that story, because I think when you hear those stories, then it sort of unlocks you, because you don't know where your cap is. And if you kind of understand, hey, there's a possibility for me to reach another level just by hearing from Faraz or hearing from myself or anybody else at this conference, like I would love for you to hear those stories. So like have conversations, chat, ask people how they got to where they are. Because like a lot of these stories, they're very serendipitous. Like people go to conferences to get a job, they work on an open source project to get a job. So if you're looking for a job, come talk to me. And I tweeted this out this morning actually. I mentioned this earlier, but I just want to say it again. It's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. So put yourself in a position for people to know you. So if you want to work on my project, please help me to know who you are, because I will take all your code as long as I know you won't disappear into some sort of woods or whatever. All right. This is me on GitHub. I rebuilt my GitHub profile using GitHub Actions, make MySpace again. It never took off, but let's bring MySpace back, guys. And then another thing, I wanted to shout out the All-In program. So we actually did an All-In open source. We actually reached out to 25 HBCU students last summer to join our program. and then now they're all interning starting Monday. We have 25 HBCU students interning at GitHub. So thank you. And honestly, I helped out with the original idea. It wasn't me, it was actually Demetrius, who's running in social impact. We actually want to make this program bigger. So we need you to share it with everybody you know who's currently in a CS or computer engineering or any other adjacent tech roles that are learning today. I would love you to join that community and then bring other people in the fold, because we want to 10x that for the next fall. So please mention that. And then remember, if you don't got sauce and you lost, I'm here sharing the secret sauce. And that's my talk. I'm B. Dougie on the internet. Thank you.